Okay, hello, my name is Natalia Bennett. In this presentation, I am going to be talking about, or outlining rather, the main points in an essay by Toni Morrison. The title of this essay is Unspeakable Things Unspoken: The Afro American Presence in American Literature. And here is a picture of the spectacular Toni Morrison. All right, so just a little bit of background on Toni Morrison. She was born on February 8th, 1993, and she's currently 88 years old. Um, yeah, she's still alive and kicking. She is best known as a novelist, an editor, and a professor. Um, she's been an author to various texts. Um, but two of the ones that she's best known for is The Bluest Eye, which is personally my favorite book, which was written in 1970. This book confronts internalized racism within the African American community. Um, in this novel, uh, the African American main character, Pecola Breedlove, I believe I'm saying that correctly, aspires to have blue eyes. Another text that she's well known for is Beloved. Um, She's also a movie for. That book was written in 1987, and it examines the destructive legacy of a former slave. Um, these texts, along with many other Morrison novels, um, um, include African Americans as central to the text or as the main characters. Typically, it's in her novels are set in African American community. So, okay. So, this text, Toni Morrison, in the beginning of, in the introduction, says that she wanted to name it the cannon fodder. Um, this essay was published in the Tanner Lectures on Human Values, um, which is a collection of lectures published annually. This specific essay was published in 1988. In this essay, um, Toni Morrison's questions whether or how does African American or Afro American literature fit into the constructs of American literature. Um, she argues that American literature is somehow separate from Afro American literature. Um, she also says that Afro American literature can never be canonized if critics only preserve literary preferences of white men. But her thesis in the essay specifically examines what constitutes a literary canon in order to suggest ways of addressing the Afro American presence in American literature. Okay, so the quality of greatness. Um, in the essay, Toni Morrison says, what use is it going on about quality being the only criterion for greatness, knowing that the definition of quality is itself the subject of much rage and is seldom universally agreed upon um, by everyone at all times? So, Toni Morrison is basically saying that the problem with this is that literary critics and scholars use quality as a basis for superior literature or to classify um, what is a canonical work or a canonical text. And she proposes the solution for this problem as for these same literary critics and scholars to stop attempting to define what is considered quality and who is able to create it. So Toni Morrison also talks about Greek tragedy and its relation to American literature. So she claims that, or she feels as though Greek tragedy feels at home, just because of its similarities to African or Afro American literature. Um, she also says that Greek tragedy is similar. Oh, she points out that it's similar um, due to its communal structures that can be found in Afro American literature, religion, and philosophy. Um, these structures she defines as the functions of songs and chorus and heroic struggle portrayed in literature. Okay, so no race in canonization. Toni Morrison claims that once the black community discovered that they were a unified race or a culturally formed race, then the creators of the construct of race found that the concept of race was no longer convenient. Um, so this then brought up the idea or the the new idea that for one, race does not exist, and for two, race is not a distinguishing factor in human relationships. Um, However, this was a conflicting observation or change just because previously um, disciplines like theology and history and natural science claim that race was indeed a determining factor in human development. So Morrison is basically saying that once Black people kind of came into their identity and kind of developed a sense of community and understanding about themselves and each other, that creators of race found that um, this was just not a good idea. Unity, was not a good idea. And so decided to kind of backpedal and state that, race isn't a thing. It's nothing, you need to be worried about. Um, and, like, we're not going to look at race anymore, even though that wasn't the case prior. So, silencing the autonomy of Afro literature. Morrison talks about 4 charges against Afro literature. Um, she states that these charges are as follows. For one, there's no Afro American literature. 2, Afro American art exists but is inferior. 3, Afro American art exists but is superior only when it measures up to the universal criteria of Western art. And 4, Afro American art is worthy, but it is raw and rich like ore, and like ore, it needs refining by Western intelligence. Um, so these charges outlined by Morrison basically, in a nutshell, state that Afro American art is, I think, the second charge would kind of sum it up, that Afro American art is inferior. Is basically what she's saying here. Portrayals in canonical text. Toni Morrison points out Herman Melville's Moby Dick, which is widely considered a canonical text, and most have read it, whether it be for school or for personal reasons. Um, I, however, have not read Moby Dick, but in Unspeakable Things Unspoken, Morrison challenges the meaning of the white whale in Moby Dick. She claims that the white whale depicts American slavery and can be seen as an analogy for oppression of African Americans in Afro literature. Um, she says um, that Melville uses this um, as a stand against slavery. All right, so um, yeah, so this is the basic points that kind of stood out to me in Toni Morrison's Unspeakable Things Unspoken. Um, I definitely thought that her point about Greek tragedy was definitely interesting, and I can definitely relate to that just based on the heroic struggle kind of depicted in Greek tragedy and in Afro American literature. I also thought that she had a point in kind of saying or pointing out rather that um, Afro literature is not included in American literature. It's kind of it's all like it's also kind of pretty hard to kind of pinpoint why that is, or not really pinpoint why it is because it's kind of obvious as to why it is, but to kind of pinpoint why that continues to be. Um, but I definitely think that Morrison effectively shed light on the issue. So this is the end. Thank you all for listening.